For a lot of cars, complex panels like this doorpost with hinges fit onto are often available as either pattern or sometimes even original manufacturer replacement panels because they're complicated and they're integral to the structure of the car. But what do you do if you've got a car like this that's rare and no longer supported, and in fact its manufacturers no longer exist, and so you're kind of left stuck? So a lot of cars get scrapped under those situations as being too complex and costly to repair. But I don't want to do that, so I'm going to make this myself, and I'm going to show you how in this video. It's probably worth taking a moment to give you a bit of context at this point. This is my Talbot Matra Rancho, which I've been restoring for the last few months. It's a rare UK right-hand drive one, and the reason that they're rare is that they rust. In particular, water gets in through the rivet holes and bolt holes in the roof where various bits have been bolted on, and runs down inside the windscreen pillars and down into the doorposts and rots them from the inside out, which is what's happened here. The first challenge with remaking the door pillar is working out where to begin. There's an inner strengthening piece, so obviously that has to be separate. But it's the outer skin that's more challenging because it needs to fit pretty exactly on all four sides. The front edge needs to fit snugly against the contour of the inner surface of the outer front wing. The outer surface needs to butt up tightly against the door hinges, and so does the trailing edge, otherwise the door won't fit properly. And then obviously it has to fit precisely at the same time against the inner A-pillar, which I made in the last video. So the approach I'm going to take is to make the outer skin in two parts. I'll make the front edge and make sure that that fits against the front wing, and then the main door hinge panel, which I'll make oversized so that it overlaps the front edge, and then I can just position them correctly, cut through the overlap and join them together. And then when I've joined them up, I will have the right dimensions for the inner strengthening piece to finish off. Simple, right? I had a first run at making the front edge panel pretty early on in this restoration process, as you might even have seen. But when it came to actually fitting it on the car, firstly, I wasn't completely happy with the width of it, and secondly, I managed to put the holes and the captive nuts where the front wing bolts into it in slightly the wrong place. I'm going to have to remake this because, one, it doesn't fit brilliantly well. I could probably badger it some more into fitting, but I've made that curve inwards. I've made that start too far down, and it doesn't clear the top hinge properly. Bit of a schoolboy error. It needs to come all the way up to this indentation here, this bead, and then turn more sharply in and go up into the windscreen pillar. I mean, that's okay, it's not very complicated. The fold in the steel follows a curving path, so I'm using the bead roller to start that off. If you don't have a bead roller, then you could just hammer it out, but it does save time if you have got one. If I take the original and marry this up with it, that's about right. You can see it kind of follows the curve reasonably well, and that's a good fit against the car, or at least it will be once I've done a bit more trimming. That's a lovely fit all the way down. I'm happy with that. And as if to prove myself right, I'm doing the folds along the other edge by just bending it over in the vise instead of using the bead roller, and then hammering them across to 90 degrees on the anvil. That little piece that's sticking up is where the relief cuts are for that curve, which I'll fold back over, trim to shape and weld up, as you'll see in just a moment. And so, with those relief cuts welded up and linished back, it's time to start drilling the holes for the plug wells. To answer a question from last time, the cutting compound I use is called Bow Lube. I'll put a link in the description. Then it's time to trial fit it onto the car. And that's tight against the wing and pretty tight against the A-pillar as well. That means I can fix it in place with magnets and clamps, and then reaching inside the front wing I can mark where the holes go for the wing bolts, and then drill the holes, refit it and weld on the captive nuts. Job, I believe they say, is a good 'un. Because surviving ranchos are so rare, there aren't a lot of videos about restoring them on YouTube, and so YouTube keeps telling me that I should stop making these and make videos about something else because it doesn't have any data and can't find an audience. If you disagree with YouTube on this, then please let me know in the comments, and if you want to keep up with the series, it might well be worth hitting that notification option in the subscription. I'm not going to ask you to like and subscribe, everybody does that, you know the drill, but the notification thing will mean that you would get to see these when YouTube doesn't know who to put it in front of. Otherwise, you're going to probably miss out on any more of them. Anyway, on with the restoration. It's just held in place at the moment. It's held in place by that one clamp, and all the rest of it is friction fit. So that shows you how nice and tight it all is versus those hinges. This needs redoing, so I will take it off again and sort that out, but it's far as it's gone, I'm pretty pleased with that. We're within sight of having a doorpost. One thing this hinge panel is missing, or was missing, is a recess here for the check strap, which is a sort of spring affair, and it needs a recess to go in to fold into when the door's shut. So I've cut this piece out and hammered over the edge neatly in this sort of curved shape, cutting a slot so that the bits don't interfere with each other, and folded this tab that was along here, folded that back, and I've cut out a piece of steel and put a curve in it on the pipe handle, and that fits nicely. It fits rather snugly because it's going to have to flush fit into that slot like that, and I've just marked where I'm going to cut that tab, and then we'll cut that into shape and use it to fill the hole. Trying to fit this piece is every bit as awkward and annoying and fiddly as you might expect. You can kind of see what's going on, but it's not quite lining up for a smooth finish yet. Making just tiny little adjustments to the shape with the finger sander to get it to fit into place. Not the prettiest, there's more linishing back to do, but it's getting there. Pretty solid now. So with this panel just tacked on, having got it in the right place against the front wing, I've now wedged this in place and run a marker line down. I'm going to cut down that line through both of these, both this and this, and then that'll give me a nice even join across the two, which I can weld up. But then that'll be basic structure made, ready for me to fit the inner strengthening piece to it. It'll obviously have to come back off the car for me to do that, which is why I've just tacked that front panel in. Now that I've successfully joined together the front and back halves of this panel and got it in the right place on the car relative to the door and the front wing, it's time to take it off again, because it needs the strengthening piece built that goes on the inside. Still, I'm quite pleased with how that's coming together. I'm making a cardboard template because the shape is maybe a bit more complicated than you'd hope. The front edge of it has a fairly complex shape because it needs to go around the captive nuts and the bolts that hold the front wing on and marry up at various points along the curved edge. The complexity of the shape also gives it additional strength. A lot of the original strengthening panel was missing, presumed rusted away, but I'm reproducing the shape as best I can, and I think it's pretty close. This strengthening piece needs thicker steel than the rest of the bodywork, In the last video I said that most of the car was 0.8mm and this strengthening piece was 1mm, but I was wrong, as in so many things. In point of fact, most of the steel that I've been using is 0.9mm thick and this strengthening piece is 1.2mm. There's a certain amount of tolerance allowed in the thickness of sheet steel that you buy, but that tolerance goes mostly only one way, and funnily enough that's thinner than it's advertised as. The extra thickness makes it a bit easier to weld, but it does make it slightly harder to bend into shape, but that just means you have to hit it a bit harder with the hammer. It's all good exercise and it helps me keep warm in the shed. It's a bit of a struggle for my metal folder though. Just making a series of little patch panels like this one to fill in the gaps along this edge where it's got various bits of fold to follow the contour of the outer panel and dodge the captive nuts where the wing bolts into it. This piece fits over the rebate where the check strap goes. I've lightly tacked it on and I'm just making sure that it's nice and flush before I weld it completely. I'm using the profile gauge to get a sense of how the strengthening panel is contoured at the bottom, where it turns in inside the sill and joins the seam that it's plug welded onto. In fact, there was a certain amount of trial and error involved here, but at least this gave me a reasonable starting point. This is my very last point of reference for the original shape of this whole doorpost, and I'm about to cut it out. I think I'm safe to do that. I think I kind of know where this curve is. I'll leave this bit. This sill has an end here, but I can line that up on the front wing when I fit that. So yeah, so it's time to get brave and cut out the last bit of original doorpost. And now I can finish off the strengthening panel with a bit of fine adjustment of the lower part where it tapers inwards and then plug welds to the seam that runs along the length of the bottom of the car. And then it's ready to fit. There's a bit more work to do before I can declare this finally finished. It needs a little bit of adjusting to just improve the fit slightly. It all needs protecting against rust, especially where you've got this double skin here between the two, and it needs fitting together. So the inner and the outer need to be plug welded together, and the hinges need to be welded on as well. So there's a bit more work to do the final fitting. I don't want to rush that. But I want to work through it at a steady pace and make sure I get it right. In the meantime, I hope you have had a very pleasant Christmas if you celebrate Christmas, and a happy new year either way, and I'll catch you in 2025.